Hi, I'm Papia. In this problem, we have a function f of x is equal to 5 minus 2x cubed. We have to first verify that f actually has an inverse function. And then we have to compute the derivative of the inverse at the given a value, that's 7, using only the function f, which means we cannot compute f inverse and then figure this value. We have to use the original function f to find the derivative of the inverse function. Okay, so let's first verify that f actually has an inverse. So notice that one way you can verify it is by taking the derivative of the function. So let's do that. So f prime, the derivative of 5 is 0, and the derivative of negative 2x cubed is negative 2 times x cubed, derivative is 3x squared. So that is negative 6x squared. So notice that whatever x value you plug in from the domain of the function, which is everything, it's a polynomial, domain is all real numbers. So whatever x value you plug in, the x square is always going to be positive. With a negative sign, this value is always negative for all x. So what does that tell you? Well, if the first derivative is negative, that means the function f is always decreasing, right? Which means that the function is monotonic, strictly monotonic. So f is strictly monotonic in its domain. And if a function is strictly monotonic, it is one-to-one. And you know that any one-to-one function has an inverse. So this means f has an inverse. So this verifies that the function f will actually have an inverse function, f inverse. Now, for the second part of the problem, we have to figure out what is the derivative of the inverse function evaluated at the given a value, which is 7. Now, this part can be a little confusing, so let's think about it slowly. First, note that we know how to compute the derivative of inverse function using the original function f. So let's write that down in a little bit different way. So if you know, or if you call f inverse to be g, just give it a different name, okay? Because this notation can be confusing. So you're just denoting f inverse by g. Then what is g prime of a? That's what we want to know, right? G prime is f inverse prime at some a value. So by definition, or you can compute that yourself, to see that g prime of a is equal to 1 over f prime of g of a. Okay, so that is the formula, you can call it, that we can use to figure out our given value here. Okay, so note that we are going to use the derivative of f, and then we have to plug in g of a. So let's write that down here, what that means. Okay, so this is g. F inverse is g, right? So by this formula, this should be equal to 1 divided by f prime. Well, notice we already know what f prime of x is right here, so we can use that. But then we have to evaluate it at g of a, where g is f inverse. So evaluate at f inverse of a, which is 7. Okay, think about it. Be very careful here, okay? This is where mistakes happen usually. We cannot just find the derivative and plug in a value there. That's not what we should do. we have to figure out this value. What is f inverse of 7? Okay, so let's think about that now. Let's see. What is f inverse of 7? We don't know. So let's put a question mark. Let's figure out what is f inverse of 7. Well, remember the relation between f and f inverse, a function and its inverse. Well, whatever f inverse of 7 is, if you want to look at it from the side of the original function f, this means this is equivalent to saying 7 is equal to f of that question mark. So basically, you have to figure out what value should you plug in the given function f to get 7. That is the answer here. That's all. Okay, that's the relation between f and f inverse. So look at the expression 5 minus 2x cubed. This is where you have to do a little bit of trial and error, right? What should you plug in to get 7 as your output? Well, this is x cubed. If you plug in a negative value, with a negative you get a positive value. So notice if you plug in x equals negative 1, what happens? Plug in negative 1, you get, so f of negative 1 is 5 minus 2 times negative 1 cubed. So this is a positive 1. That means you get 2, so 5 plus 2 is 7. Therefore, f inverse 7 is negative 1. All right, so we found this value. So then we have to figure out 1 divided by f prime of negative 1. So this is the part you have to remember. You cannot plug in 7. You have to figure out f inverse of 7 using the function f. And now it's very easy. We know the derivative is right here. So you just have to plug in negative 1 in the derivative. So 1 divided by, you know, it's negative 6x squared. So negative 6 times negative 1 squared. So negative 1 squared is positive 1 times negative 6. Answer is negative 1/6. Thank you.